Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Troy Schneider, president of GovExec 360. It's my pleasure today to welcome you to this event, Securing the Nation Through Innovative Enterprise IT Services. Before we begin, just a couple notes. To the right of your screen, you'll find a chat box which you can use to talk with fellow attendees or to ask for technical assistance. Additionally, note that this event is being recorded and will be available shortly in on-demand form for you to watch again or to share with your colleagues. Now let's get to the substance of today's discussion. Staying at the forefront of digital technologies and innovation is imperative for U.S. national security and for the general effectiveness of government. For decades, the Defense Information Systems Agency has led this charge, providing for and supporting the innovation needed to provide enterprise-level IT capabilities and services to the nation's warfighters, to senior defense leaders, and really all the organizations throughout the Department of Defense. Today, we have Sharon Woods, the director of DISA's Hosting and Compute Center, or HAC, who's talking with us about the connectivity, computing, and cloud challenges that DISA faces, the solutions and advancements that they're attempting to harness, and where enterprise systems fit into all of this. And so now, without further ado, I'd like to hand things off to Ms. Woods for her presentation.
My name is Sharon Woods. I am the director of the Hosting and Compute Center, like Troy said. Thank you to FCW and Government Executive for the opportunity to address you today. I did want to talk about OCONUS Cloud. The HAC is responsible for deploying the 11 data centers across the globe, as well as Stratus, which is our private cloud instantiation, and then we are responsible for the Joint Warfighting Cloud Capability Contract, which is in the process of being awarded in December. We're highly confident of that date, but that will provide hosting and compute from commercial cloud across all classification levels, including tactical edge devices. It will be the only contract in the Department of Defense that includes that entire scope. So I wanted to start off this conversation with why are we doing OCONUS Cloud at all? And the bottom line is to win. The China threat is real. And you can look at open source information and see that China is investing enormous resources into cloud, into artificial intelligence, into cyber, and the like. And the department has to position itself to capitalize on those modern technologies as well, because we have to outpace our near-peer adversaries. And deploying OCONUS Cloud as part of that strategy is an imperative. We have to achieve an information advantage over our near-peer adversaries, and doing that means we have to be able to collect and process data locally at the point of collection, not just where there is persistent and reliable communications. And doing that really comes back to an OCONUS Cloud strategy. And I wanted to talk a little bit about definitions of OCONUS Cloud versus tactical edge so that we're having a kind of a common understanding of the terminology that I'm using. So OCONUS Cloud is whenever someone is accessing cloud hosting and compute anywhere in the world, just outside of the continental United States. So it includes Hawaii. It's not just in theater operations where the warfighter might operate. Tactical edge is an element of OCONUS Cloud. From a military standpoint, tactical edge is anywhere where there is denied, disrupted, interrupted, latent communications. So there is no connectivity back to the broader network transport. So they're definitely related to one another, but there is a differentiation between the two. Before I go into the strategy that HAC is following for OCONUS Cloud, I'll just give a little bit of context around this. This is a depiction of HAC's overarching strategy for hosting and compute. It is a hybrid and multi-cloud approach. It is an approach that addresses both CONUS and OCONUS hosting and compute capabilities. And I would sum it up by saying we have to have unified hosting and compute across all platforms, whether it is data center, inclusive of mainframe, whether it's private cloud or commercial cloud. And it has to be unified. We're looking at a global meshed footprint. So let me give you 2 vignettes, and then I will walk through how the hack is thinking about OCONUS Cloud. The first example comes from Operation Allies Refuge. That was the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And the Air Mobility Command is responsible for over 300 aircraft, and they were heavily involved in the operation to evacuate personnel. And they have command and control systems that they were using to track the aircraft as well as the cargo and people in those aircraft. But the C2 systems, they were pulling the information and manually aggregating it and putting it into PowerPoint slides to provide to leadership to understand what was happening. And obviously, that is not an ideal situation. Luckily, they had a group of folks, and we were working with them. At the time, I was the director of the Cloud Computing Program Office, which is now a part of the hack. And they had been using infrastructure as code, which is a product that CCPO had developed, and now the hack continues to deploy. They're pre-configured, pre-accredited baselines that stand up a basic cloud environment in an automated way. It's a process that using infrastructure as code takes 2 to 4 hours, but our experience with customers was that it was taking them weeks, if not months, to do the same thing. And the application would then pull the C2 data into the cloud and apply data analytics to show a common operating picture so that you could, in fact, track the aircraft and cargo and personnel on those airplanes real time. But it was in a development environment. And so what they did was use infrastructure as code to, within the 2 to 4 hours, create a production environment. And so in less than 72 hours from kind of concept to delivery, they had a real-time common operating picture of AMC's aircraft and cargo. So you can see there's a hybrid element to that. There's a tactical element to that. It involves command and control systems. So that's one vignette I would share with you. The other vignette involves tactical assault kits, or TACs. There's a number of purposes for these devices, but one of them is tracking troop movement, which, for among many things, is critical to avoid friendly fire, as an example. The TACs are used locally where warfighters operate in theater, but then they're able to connect to cloud and provide information to decision makers, whether that is OCONUS in a military base or CONUS in the United States. But you can imagine many circumstances where connectivity is severed, and so that reach back to CONUS is just simply not available. So how do we take compute technology and push that out to the edge so that something like TAC continues to work, because they have to be able to track where they are regardless of whether the decision makers in headquarters can. So those are the 2 vignettes that I wanted to give you a flavor of some of what we are thinking about. So what are we doing to get there? There are 2 pieces to this. One is local connectivity, as deep into the tactical edge as possible, and looking at a global footprint as vast as possible. And there's a few different ways we're going to get there, and I'll get into that next, but that is part 1 of what we need to do. Part 2 is having local compute independent of connectivity to get after some of the vignettes that I was talking about, of which there are many others. So how are we going to get there? And the hack is thinking about this in 3 ways. And I will start right off the bat by saying there are challenges that are unsolved with what I'm about to share. And we need industry's partnership to help us solve for some of these problems. These are not things that the department can solve on its own. So the first is integrated transport. And there's some capabilities we're going to be getting with JWCC that I think are instrumental to doing this. The Department of Defense has its own network, its own transport network that has global reach, but each of the commercial cloud service providers do as well. And so one of the things we get with JWCC is access to their points of presence, the locations across the world where you can, in fact, access their networks. The department has points of presence as well. So imagine a world where we are meshing those things across multiple cloud providers. It provides a level of resiliency, redundancy, reliability that exceeds what we have today. Another use case, and this kind of is a segue into the second part of how we think we're going to get there, is that what about locations where the points of presence are close to the DISA data centers, OCONUS? So think about, for instance, Frankfurt. There's a number of commercial POPs there in Frankfurt. We have a DISA data center in Wiesbaden, Germany, which is not that far from Frankfurt. What if we connected the two? And so now we not just have integrated transport, but we've integrated the DISA data centers beyond what the DoD transport network can provide. So integrated transport, getting as deep into the tactical edge environment as possible with a level of redundancy that we don't have today, is crucial to getting after local connectivity, to get after some of the vignettes that I was describing. The second part to this is transforming the DISA data centers into hybrid cloud centers. What do I mean by that? And I go back to this picture, but there is a spectrum of hosting and compute. And I like to emphasize this because a couple years ago, I think there was this artificial narrative that you had to pick, that you had to take everything from the data center and move everything into the cloud, that it was this binary choice. And there were a number of mandates that came out that I think really put program leads and offices under a lot of pressure to reach that mandate of move everything into commercial cloud within 2 years. No one met that objective. I do think moving to commercial cloud is important, and there's a lot of technology there that you simply can't get any other way. But right now, the data centers are traditional hosting and compute. And it can't be limited to just that if we're going to have a viable OCONUS cloud strategy. We have a private cloud instantiation that we call Stratus. And why not deploy Stratus OCONUS? Why not put it in that data center in Wiesbaden, for instance? And the other element to this, and this is where I think there are definitely some challenges where we'll need some help, is what about the commercial cloud providers? There's reasons related to data sovereignty why we can't use their data centers that are OCONUS, right? We're limited to using the data centers that are CONUS, which means that we're limited to connectivity reach back to the United States. Well, that's not always going to be available for a number of reasons, and the department can't afford to only have a single pathway, right? We have to be able to have our PACE plan and have some different methods of accessing hosting and compute. The commercial cloud service providers, they need a certain number of servers to create an instantiation of their cloud environments. Well, what if we created a satellite instantiation in a DISA data center? So now they really are hybrid cloud centers, and we have solved for that data sovereignty and reachback issue. A number of issues around that, logistics, what kind of power needs are there, what's the business case, what does the scalability look like? But I think that thinking about the DISA data centers, and you can see that's the orange dots there of where they're located, is really important that we get to this hybrid cloud center concept, because really what we're doing is creating local cloud regions, OCONUS, right? The commercial cloud providers have regions CONUS. Why can't we create something like that OCONUS that's using hybrid cloud technology? So that's element 2. And then element 3, and this is the tactical edge capabilities. Give me a second here. Okay. Another thing we're going to get with JWCC is access to their tactical edge capabilities, of which there are many form factors now. I would say over the last couple years, there's been a lot of development in tactical edge devices. They take many different sizes, so some of them are as large as a Connex container, something that you might put in an OCONUS military base, because they require persistent connectivity. But it, again, gives you that OCONUS footprint, that local compute that's independent of reach back to the United States. Other devices are 1 to 2 person lift, ruggedized devices. You can throw that on the back of a Humvee. Think about the tactical assault kit vignette. That gives them local access to compute independent of connectivity if they're able to take that tactical edge device with them and have the TAC devices hang off of that. And then the other form factors can be as small as something that fits in a backpack. And the amount of compute in those devices continues to move up. So when you think about an OCONUS cloud strategy and how we're going to get there, I'll just, the 3 parts of it again are integrated transport. We have to get after local connectivity as deep into the tactical edge with as vast as a footprint as possible. The second one was transforming the DISA data centers into hybrid cloud centers. And that last one is integrating tactical edge devices into the OCONUS cloud strategy. So when are we doing these things? Like I said, JWCC will be awarded in December. So we're going to be working really hard to get those capabilities delivered. And then the other thing that the HAC is doing is, I mentioned before, why not take Stratus, our private cloud instantiation, why not deploy at OCONUS? And so we're defining a pilot right now, and in the first half of calendar year 2023, from pilot definition to delivery of the pilot, we will, choose an OCONUS location and start proving that out. One of the mandates in the HAC is that we don't start new efforts unless we can get to either a pilot delivery or minimum viable product, depending on if we think we can get to production right away in 6 months or less. And we've done that repeatedly now with different capabilities. And the last thing I wanted to mention, because I've spent a lot of time talking about technology and getting into some of that jargon and multi-part technology solutions, is the people. There are roughly 2,000 people in HAC right now that operate the data centers. You know how strapped for resources the department and the government is. I'm not getting more people. I need to capitalize on the workforce that we have now, invest in them, and train that workforce. And so we call that Technician of the Future. It's an effort that we launched probably about 6 months ago now. We were doing a gap analysis, and we're in the process of hiring a chief learning officer so that we can really focus 100% on making that happen. We're thinking about it in terms of cross-disciplinary, and I think that integration across technologies is really important. So don't just be a database administrator. Don't just be a system administrator. Have a level of knowledge across these things, and as part of the Technician of the Future initiative, we'll be defining those pathways so that people don't have to guess as to which courses they need to take or what shadow opportunities or conferences they should go to. That's the point, is they're learning, so we need to help provide that pathway for them to learn and get to a level of knowledge. We don't expect people to be experts in all of those areas, and for folks that are in the traditional data centers, transferring that knowledge into cloud is also important, not just the cross-disciplinary nature. But if you're only a system administrator and there's an issue, you could spend hours and hours triaging an issue when it turned out to be database. And so I mentioned the people piece of this because none of this is possible. The OCONUS cloud strategy and the complexity of that technology is not possible without training the workforce. And I don't think there's a single agency in the government that would say their technologists are predominantly knowledgeable in cloud technology. We're just not quite there yet. So we need to be thinking about the people as part of this. So I'll wrap up there and hand it back over to Troy. But thank you so much for the opportunity to talk a little bit about our OCONUS cloud strategy.
So let's continue this conversation on enterprise services with SolarWinds Chief Information Security Officer and Vice President of Security, Tim Brown, and the company's Group Vice President of Products, Brandon Shop. Brandon, thanks to both of you for being here.
It's great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So, Brandon, maybe could you get us started with just a brief overview of SolarWinds' mission and how it pertains to the topic of today's webcast?
Yeah, no, great question. SolarWinds has been around for 20 plus years, and our focus is providing comprehensive full stack observability solutions, whether you're on premises, you're in the cloud, or you're in the midst of migrating or going through your digital transformation on that front. Ultimately, we want to be able to provide solutions both for where you're at today, but also where you're going to tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And in your experience, what are some of the challenges that you've seen or heard from your government clients? What are they facing, and how are industry partners positioned to help collaborate with them to innovate and provide solutions to those challenges?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot. So Tim here. So there's a lot of commonality between industry and government, right? We're all trying to do more with less, right? We have, an explosion in complexity. We have issues of connectivity between, cloud provider to on-prem to cloud provider to just our applications have become, much more complex. So we try to answer the question of it's slow. Right? We try to answer the question of, well, it's not working right. It becomes really just a challenge. And, people need to have that visibility. They need to be able to, see what's going on. They need to be able to diagnose. They need the tools at hand to be able to do things that humans just can't do any longer. It's just gotten so big. It, requires appropriate technology to be able to help solve the problems that they're facing. Mm-hmm. Other things you hear, Brandon?
Yeah, no, I think you definitely hit on some of the big ones there. I mean, some of the other ones that I hear is, and I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit as well, is, organizations are more dependent upon technology than ever before. And that's only continuing to increase at a steady rate there. And so, whereas downtime in the past, was an inconvenience, now that could, compromise a mission. It could mean lives. It means money. On that front. If healthcare.gov is down, you need to get that back up and running as quickly as humanly possible. And so, having, comprehensive visibility is something that folks have been struggling with. Historically, a lot of organizations were structured in a very siloed type of manner. You had your applications team, your database team, your network team, and all of them that own their discrete functions. And the reality is now folks need to work together. You hear terms like DevOps and SecOps and DevSecOps. You're seeing a lot of that blending and bringing together in order to really drive, the availability and performance of those applications and services.
Okay. And, as we heard Ms. Woods say in her presentation, DISA and really most of DoD is pushing the limits in terms of how many IT personnel are available and the demands are being placed on them. So I'm curious, how can implementing smarter enterprise systems create efficiencies and help ease the burden that these agencies are facing with their personnel? Brandon, you want to take a first stab at that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I go back to when I first came into the industry as a network engineer, being able to configure and manage, the routing and switching environment, that was the key, capability that they're looking for from me on that front. Having things like scripting knowledge was a nice to have. And where I'm going with that is, nowadays the technologies that are available allow folks to, automate more. And streamline more. That's more commonplace, that usage of automation within agencies and organizations. And then additionally, technologies have continued to mature. So in the past, where it took human effort, manpower, human power in order to achieve, now you can leverage technologies like AI ops and machine learning in order to, really sift through and drive to a root cause, do event correlation, and do other tasks like that, which again, allow you to do more with less. And so, those are a couple of the big trends that I'm seeing, is more use in automation and more usage and leveraging of technologies like AI and ML.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's a great point, right? If you look at where we go with AI and ML, we are going beyond what the single or group of humans could get together and do, right? We're taking data from many different points, becoming more proactive on how we manage things, more predictive on what might happen, right, in the future. So that is a step forward that makes our personnel more efficient, right? It makes them so that they can, do more with, fewer in some ways, because, we do have a shortage across the world of, good IT folks, good security folks. And so it's important that we both help to, train folks up, get more people in field, but then also make those people a little bit more efficient in what they're doing at the same time.
Yeah. And one of the good things I would say too, I mean, is, coming out of President Biden's executive order, is there's a concerted effort and focus, at least as it pertains to security, in the market, to where, vendors like Microsoft and Google have, said that, raised our hand and said, what, we're going to fund and we're going to kind of train, a larger population of folks around IT security, in order to address some of these concerns and gaps and limitations out there in the market. So there's definitely a recognition, that there is a shortage out there, and private, vendors, are stepping up to try to fill that void.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And this is a question I think maybe better suited for Tim, but either of you can weigh in. The challenges that you're seeing with with workforce in general, and then also in the sort of pace of adoption with AI that you were touching on. Are you seeing patterns across government? Does the DISA situation sort of match what you're seeing in federal civilian agencies, or are you seeing kind of certain corners of government like either ahead or facing different challenges?
Yeah, so the civilian organizations end up being able to move faster often, right? Because of sometimes less certifications, sometimes less kind of oversight that had to be there prior to procurement. So in some ways, the government hampers itself because it can't procure fast enough. Mm-hmm. Right? Things like common criteria that take a year to go through, you're already a year behind on versions. So I think some of those things that we need to kind of help the Fed government be able to streamline what they're doing so that they can, acquire new solutions, acquire innovative solutions. Those solutions could have more risk because they haven't gone through the rigor, but in some cases that's okay, right? So I think we have some work to do from the acquisition of software, and the smaller, the smaller companies that tend to be a little bit more innovative may not be able to go through some of the rigorous, testing and requirements that you have for, say, FedRAMP and other things. So we have to somehow help that process go forward if we want U.S. government to stay ahead, right? And, be as innovative as possible. So a bigger topic, and, just one that is, something that is a challenge.
Yeah, and I'll add on top of that here. And so, one of the things that I see additionally as well on that front is, I do see certain aspects and certain elements of government maybe be a little bit more on the cutting edge, when it comes to that, especially, where they're really pushing the envelope, as you look at specifically like DISA and wartime fighters and some of the activities, linking up with NATO and bringing in disparate data sources from all the different NATO countries. They're really having to probably push the envelope a lot earlier and a lot harder than, say, your Veterans Administration or, and those types of things. So, there are certain elements and certain aspects of or areas of the federal government that are definitely, kind of leading the charge, if you will, on that front. And so, and the good thing is they're imparting that knowledge. They're documenting that knowledge, their learnings, and they're sharing that throughout, the government in terms of, standards, baselines, best practices, and those types of things. So they're kind of blazing a trail as well, for some of the other folks.
Yeah, and if you just think about the technology, right? The technology of the past. I was talking to one of our folks who happened to be a Marine pilot, and he said that the average of number of IPs they have on a helicopter with 8 people on it. Guess how many? 40. He has 40 unique for 8 people. Because everybody's got 3 phones, right? Everybody's got these things. Everybody's got these things, and so, but that's the world that we're living in and we're adapting to. Just the complexity associated with that. And then when you look at the warfighter themselves, how many IPs do they have on them now? Great advancements and very important advancements. But again, more complexity, right? More information, more things to diagnose, more things to make sure are working well. So I don't think we're the lacking the kind of the complexity moving forward either, right? I think it just keeps growing.
And yes, and having to connect all those devices in an environment that, particularly for DoD, is constantly changing. It's not exactly sitting inside a well-defined perimeter. So I want to come back to the point you made about how industry and government can help one another sort of move things along faster in a minute. But I want to stay with DISA and some of the things that Ms. Woods said. She also highlighted DISA's strategy to pursue the creation of more hybrid cloud environments and bring that connectivity out to the tactical edge, sort of getting to all of those devices that you were talking about. These are challenges that just up that complexity. And why is the collaboration between government and industry so important here? And how do we kind of move to find more manageable and agile solutions to make that collaboration bring the mission results that we need?
Yeah, I think if you look at the IoT space, right? Just in general, if you look at that in healthcare, if you look at that in manufacturing, if you look at what we're doing with smart factories, smart cities, smart hospitals, all of them have a lot of correlation with what the government has attempted to do as well. So it's not that they're foreign, they're not completely different, right? The number of sensors a patient has at a advanced hospital is very similar to the number of sensors that a warfighter has, right? And do we need to connect that at the edge? Do we need to collect that locally for the hospital? Well, if the hospital's network goes down, we don't want patients to die. So we've instituted things at the hospital layer to be able to collect things locally and have alternatives for going to the cloud. Cloud adds value. Cloud can do analysis, but you still have the base information of, this drug was administered at this point in time that never leaves local. So I think the correlations between what we're facing on the commercial side and what we're facing in the military side are very, very similar. We can learn from each other and take the technology that's utilized in both and kind of put them together.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Troy, earlier too that we've talked about personnel. There's just not enough to go around. And now we're starting to add in. We're talking about cloud. It's a brand new set of technologies and capabilities that IT professionals have to understand and learn. Multi-cloud, clouds don't work the same from one cloud to the other on that front. And so, all of Tim's points, but also some of it too is just, again, going back to, best practices and how do you do more with less and how do you impart and share that knowledge? And it's not just at an IT level. Again, it's also at an information security level as well. And so, the more that we can, learn from each other, it's going to reduce risk, and complexity, but it's also going to speed, these projects forward as well. And so, you're seeing a lot of initiatives and efforts, across both the public and private sector, to drive more of that collaboration, drive more of that type of sharing of information. If you go kind of back, 5 years ago, you have things like ISACs on the security side, that focus around things like national defense or financial services. And those are great, but those are very siloed. And so, how do you break down those silos, get the teams and functions and folks across different industries ultimately working together. And so, I always go, it's always better to learn from your peers on that front. You're going to learn a lot more and you're going to move a lot faster.
Great. And Tim mentioned, the way that procurement and certification requirements can slow things down, and obviously changing the DFAR or the FedRAMP certification standards is above all of our pay grades. But within the framework that exists for government right now, what can industry partners do, and what can the sort of mission owners, your direct customers, what steps can we take to try and speed things along and create a less friction in the process?
Yeah, so I think we still have to have some of the oversight, some of the friction. It's just going to be necessary. I think you need to have some different sponsorship for the smaller, more innovative companies and be able to have some exceptions granted for some of them. And I know there's some processes in place that allow that. So companies like us, we're of a size that can go through the certification process, but you get a lot of small sponsored companies that, U.S. government is sponsoring, but they can't afford those processes that are necessary. So I think some of the streamline for the smaller companies and some exceptions for the smaller companies and some, flexibility for the smaller companies, I think that's both can be acceptable risk, but it can also do the effort of supporting our small businesses and spurring on innovation. So I think we can try to help on that side, right? When we think about, okay, is it always just a no for a small company? Maybe it's not just a no. Maybe it's a yes, but we're going to have to do some work around the outside edges to get you an appropriate exception.
Very good.
Yeah,
how about you? Any sort of process hacks that you can suggest or hope for?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I would look at is, we talked about a couple. We talked about FedRAMP. We talked about common criteria. But there are so many more certifications. I mean, you've got DODIN, you've got FIPS, you've got, across the various branches of government and military on that front. And all of those are very independent, and they share a lot of similar controls and, mandates or measures that you have to have in place. And for me to have to go through that, again, not just from a time and a human perspective, but from a pure dollar perspective, to Tim's point, to go through some of those same things that I just went through again and again and again, it's just not efficient. It's from a human perspective or a cost perspective. And so I think if we could look to align, some of these various certifications, and I may choose not to go down a certain path, but you know what? I have more flexibility and options. Then it may reduce my cost and the burden there, the time to market and the time to go through it. And so, which again, reduces cost, on that front. And so I think that's another thing that we can look at, as an industry on how to, further streamline, some and make these less onerous, for organizations ultimately.
Yeah. Very good. We are coming up on time, but I want to pose a last question to each of you. And it's just that, what final advice would you give to our audience members, particularly those that are in federal agencies, as they navigate their own cloud and computing challenges? And Brandon, we'll start with you, and then Tim will let you have the final word.
Great.
Yeah, sounds good. And so, I think, the advice that I typically give when I talk to folks is you've got, don't try to boil the ocean, break things down. There's a lot of new activities going on, a lot of new tasks. We talk about cloud migration or moving entities and applications and assets to the cloud. And, it's not as simple as it may sound that you hear it from other folks, and you've got to learn, you've got to grow and learn. So start simple, grow, and as you learn more, you can increase the complexity of the challenges that you're trying to solve. And so you've really got to prioritize and break it down, and it's actually something that I'll actually give Tim credit here for, from when I've worked with him, is you've got to think about kind of what is your crown jewel in your organization, how do you make sure that it's performant, that it operates the way you need to, that it's protected and secure, and then you can kind of expand out from there. And so So I like to break things down into, smaller work elements or in which to focus on. Otherwise, some of these initiatives and projects that agencies are trying to go through, they're extremely large and they're extremely complicated. And so, take it one step at a time, understand that you're going to have learnings, that you're going to have some failures, and that's okay. As long as obviously it doesn't, have any, negative or really adverse impacts or effects on that front. And so, it's kind of the old analogy of fail fast, on that front. It's okay, learn, go through it, start small, grow, and your team, your organization will learn, and you'll be able to handle some more of the complex challenges that come your way.
Great. Thank you for that. And Tim, how about your words of wisdom?
Yeah, so we've come a great way, right? If you think about where we were just a few years ago from a technology perspective, how fast technology changes, we don't want that pace to change, right? We want to be able to continue to evolve, continue to adapt, continue to get better and better and better. With that complexity, I think in the video, Sharon mentioned of the hybrid world, mentioned that, at one point we said, we're going to go all cloud, right? No, that didn't happen, right? We still have legacy. We still have regular systems. We still have data centers. We still have people with huge numbers of devices. So not everything is going to be cloud, but we're going to continue down the path of more and more technology for the right reason, to be able to solve our problems in a better way and continue to grow. So don't be afraid of that, right? Really embrace the fact that we're going to have a hybrid world. Embrace the fact that we're going to need to manage in those hybrid worlds. Embrace the fact that, we've increased the complexity, but we've increased our functionality and we've gotten better, right? So, don't fear change, embrace it, and really drive towards those next layers. And then look for the technology to help you, look for the technology to manage, look for the technology to help you, be as efficient as possible in these, complex new environments.
Very good. Well, gentlemen, thank you both for taking time and sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you to the audience for choosing to spend a portion of your day with us and tuning in for this webcast. If you missed any segment from today's event, you'll get an email later this week with the on-demand video. I hope you share these conversations with your colleagues and help us continue the conversation around some of government's most complicated issues. So on behalf of GovExec, thank you. My name is Troy Schneider, and I hope to see you next time.